you start understanding that, well, even the nice training, good atmosphere, good enthusiasm, and so on, that's not enough, because what you can control this way when you are training and when you are being enthusiastic, you are only able to control the most superficial muscles here. But the deep muscular connections, and what is even more important, the premuscular connections, you cannot control it via the kind of mental engagement and via the conscious effort, so via the voluntary engagement. So this is where you need to uh, get those levels addressed and connected. And this way we arrive to the central point of the entire ABR thing. So what is ABR, right? So ABR is actually a very, very simple philosophy, right? A very simple method in that sense. So our basic idea is always the same. So we want to create multiple distributed connections. That's what we are looking at. So in fact, there are like two basic messages. So first basic message is this, that your child is in the situation when he is trying to use a small number of big muscles, right? So you see the small number of the big muscles in order to do the complicated jobs, right? So, but what do we want to do? We want to change this situation so that the main formula looks like this, that he uses a large number of the very small muscles and pre-muscles in order to get the same job. So, and that's really it. So what is spasticity? Spasticity is this situation when the large number of the small connections is missing. Well, I should probably put this in red, right? So you see that's in red. Large number of small connections is missing. So the body has to use the small number of large connections. So that's exactly what the problem is. Instead of the very large number of very small connections, the body ends up using a very small number of very large connections. So in that sense, I can probably draw it even like this, right? So that's the idea. So that's the mechanism behind the spasticity, and that's what we want to do. Now, in reality, it's not mysterious at all. Because you see, if I ask you the next question, so like when we look at the ribs and when we look at their connections to the spine, when we look at the connections between the ribs with each other, you can see there are like really large numbers. We talk about hundreds of the connections, hundreds. In reality, we talk about the thousands, but it's just hundreds that we can actively observe and follow. So, and this is, I always ask parents a simple question. So, okay, guys, but in this situation, so for example, are you able to do voluntarily to move, let's say, your thoracic vertebra number 5? Are you able to do this? You say, well, I don't even know where it is, right? So then if I ask you, are you able to move your, let's say, 11th rib? You would also say, no, I don't know where my 11th rib is. But the thing is that you have this foundation. So that's the key, that 90% of your total control, or maybe even more, belongs to this kind of hidden level, the hidden multiple connections of this kind. So very large number of the very small connections, but they are deep. So in that respect, you as a person, you might not know about them. You might not be aware about them unless something breaks there or snaps, or you have a spasm or something like this, right? But your brain is very much aware about it, right? So your brain is the one that's using most of its activities. That's where your brain is using all these deep connections. So that's really the central, very simple idea, that we want to get more out of those deep, deep and small connections. We want to activate them. And that's what ABR techniques are about. So how to make, a stimulation at this scale of centimeters in such a way that the body responds, that it responds into those small areas between the ribs, between the spines, where the connection between the shoulder blade and the torso, like all these small links, how to make them activate. So, and those things, like those techniques like the vibra ball and the specific sort of sequence of how to get through the connection, contact connection activation. So that's the specific kind of algorithm of how to make those deep elements to respond. So that's really a very, very like straightforward understanding once you kind of get a grasp of it. And on the opposite, the usual training itself, when facing the trouble that this very small number of very large muscles is not capable of delivering the result, then what you're trying to do, you're trying to get even more out of those muscles, right? You want to get more intensity, more engagement. You want to use them even more. And the central point that we bring to you guys is that, it's the other way around. Instead of using them harder, we actually want to establish that underlying the foundational level. So use as much as possible very large number of very small connections. So that's the entire logic of which is kind of giving you two answers, right? On the one hand, it's the answer why has the so-called spasticity, right? So what is it? So spasticity is exactly that. Spasticity is the situation when you use a very large, small number of very large muscles, right? Then you also get an answer like why with the age this situation gets worse, right? Because he's getting heavier, so he has, those very small number of the very large muscles is working increasingly harder, right? And then there is a third answer here, is that, okay, why is it more pronounced, the spasticity in the extremities, so at the legs and arms, rather than in the torso? Well, the answer is also very simple, because the muscles the muscles within the legs and the arms, they are the smaller in number and larger in size, right? So, and what do we need to do? We need to get this deep connection. So get more, very large number of very small muscles, and in that sense also ideally the premuscular connections as well.